Hello, everybody. Today we're going to be learning about ancient Greece, and we're going to learn more about this culture by discussing 5 of the key vocabulary terms that show us how this civilization is unique. So by the end of the lesson, I want everyone to be able to define all 5 of the ancient Greek vocabulary terms on the graphic organizer. Why it's important that we understand these terms is because these ideas and practices that started in ancient Greece still impact us today and are still around in our society. And I think you'll start to make some of those connections as we go through the slides. So let's go ahead and get started. Our first term is democracy. And democracy is the idea that the people or the citizens of a country should maintain an active role in their government. Now, this could be through them directly participating and holding a position of power in the government, or this could be through them electing representatives that are going to represent their ideas and beliefs in the government. So first I want to look at this picture in the top left corner. You can see that the people are submitting their individual votes into this box. What's important to talk about when we discuss voting is that no matter what, the results of a vote are not going to please everybody. There's no way that everybody can be happy or that everybody can get their way. But what's important with voting is that everybody is getting that opportunity to voice their opinion and to have a say in how the government is ran. And so that is really the core idea of democracy, is that the people are getting the opportunity to be heard and to have a say in how they're governed and the rules that they're going to follow. And so even though our first democracy was in Athens, Greece, you can see that today here in the United States, our democracy doesn't look that different from the one that would have been in ancient Greece. The idea is very similar, and it's an idea that has really held strong over time. So a synonym for the word democracy would be equality, and an antonym would be unfairness. So now that we've talked about this first term, let's go back to our graphic organizer and let's fill out this first row together so that you know exactly what's expected of you. So our first term was democracy, and that's what you will write in this first column. In the next column, I want you to write a definition in your own words. Now, this doesn't have to be a super long definition, just one that's going to help you remember the term. So I'm going to write the idea that people play an active role in the government. Now, in this third column, the characteristics / drawing, you can feel free to draw your own picture, or you can write down some of the characteristics of the images that we discuss on the slides. So since I'm on a computer, I'm going to go ahead and do a characteristic, and I'm just going to write that everyone has the opportunity to voice their opinion when voting, because that's what we talked about. Then in this fourth column, you're going to write down a synonym and an antonym, and I will be giving you one for each term. So first, I would start just by marking S for synonym and A for antonym, so you know which one is which. And then all you have to do is write the ones I give you. So our synonym for democracy was equality, and our antonym was unfairness. And so that's what it should look like up to this point. This last column, the connection to other terms and civilizations, I can't really ask you to fill that one out yet because we've only done one term, so there's not much to connect to. But as we go through the presentation, I am going to be showing you how the terms connect to one another. And as I tell you what those connections are, you can go back and fill out this column or this whole column as we discuss. But for now, this is what I would expect each of your graphic organizers to look like as we go through these terms. So let's continue. Our next word is polis, and this was the structure of the communities in ancient Greece. So a polis consisted of a large city in the center, and then in the surrounding area you had lots of farmland, and there was some housing and some people lived out in this land, but for the most part the people resided in the major city. So what's important to note about the polis is that each of them were considered independent states. And this is because they were separated by many land barriers. So there were many polis throughout ancient Greece, but they were separated by things like mountains, and they also had water barriers that separated them. So each of them kind of lived independently, and they could decide what rules they wanted to abide by, what form of government they wanted to have, what religion they wanted to practice. They could all decide individually the practices that they would have. So this kind of ties into democracy, because that was just one form of government that was prevalent in ancient Greece. So not every polis had democracy as its form of government, and that was okay because they were each considered independent. So a synonym for polis would be city-state, and an antonym would be nature reserve, which is an area that people cannot inhabit. Our next term is Olympics, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with. So the Olympic Games, they were a series of athletic events, and they took place in Greece once every 4 years. So unlike today, they only took place in Greece. They didn't take place all over the world like they do now. And so athletes from each of the polis could come and participate in the Olympic Games. And this is kind of like how we have people from different countries, or athletes from different countries, coming to participate. That's kind of how it was with the polis as well. So they could come and participate and represent their polis in the games. And then if we look at the picture up here in the top left, you can see what an arena would have looked like at this time. So this area in the middle is where the athletes would have competed, and the seating on the outside is where the spectators would have sat to watch the games. And these were not just games to the Greek people. These meant so much to them because they were in honor of the Greek god Zeus, and we'll talk more about him on the next slide. But it's important to note that these were not just games; they were much more than that, and the Greeks really took them very seriously. So a synonym for Olympics is going to be competition, and an antonym is going to be cooperation. Our next term is mythology, and mythology was the Greek religion. It was a collection of myths, and it was a way for the ancient Greeks to explain the world around them and make sense of their world. They made up these stories to help them make sense of the things around them. So they had Greek gods, Greek goddesses, and mythical creatures in these stories, and they would explain different life events. So one very popular Greek myth is the myth of Medusa. And the myth says that Medusa has a gaze that will turn people to stone. So anybody she looks at is said to turn to stone. And so that's just one example. And this in the top right corner is a picture of what Medusa is depicted to be. So that's just one example of a Greek myth. But at the time, although we see them today as maybe silly stories and we don't take them very seriously, it's important to note that at the time, the people of ancient Greece, they saw this as their religion, and it was extremely important to them. And that's why the Olympics were also important to them, because they were to honor Zeus, which was a very important Greek god. So a synonym for mythology would be legend, and an antonym would be fact. Our last word is philosophy, and it's probably our most difficult one to define, but it's pretty much the study of reality and the idea of existence. So two of the most famous Greek philosophers were Plato, which is up here on the left, and Aristotle, who's up here on the top right. And Plato and Aristotle posed important questions, such as, how did we get here? What is our purpose? What makes a person good and what makes a person bad? These questions are still pondered today by philosophers. These are questions that no one will ever be able to answer for sure, but they are things that really help us when we ask these questions and we start to think about them. They help us to understand the actions of people and how societies get to places that they are. It helps us decide the morals that we want to follow as a society. And so that is why philosophy is so important, not only to the ancient Greeks, but also an important idea today. But Plato and Aristotle were really two of the major people that kickstarted the idea of philosophy, and that's why they are so important to learn about today. And so a synonym for philosophy would be principles, and an antonym would be inactiveness. All right, that was our last term for today. I want everyone to make sure to look over these terms because we might be having a short quiz tomorrow. But other than that, everyone did a great job today, and we are finished.